You're sitting at your kitchen table, struggling to pay your mortgage, watching your kids eat cheaper food because grocery prices keep rising, wondering how you'll ever afford to send them to college. Meanwhile, somewhere in a Pentagon conference room, a defense contractor just signed another no bid contract worth more than your entire neighborhood will earn in their lifetime. And here's the part that should make your blood boil: that contract is being paid for with money that doesn't even exist yet. Money that your children and grandchildren will spend their entire working lives paying back with interest. Over the past 23 years, America has poured over $8 trillion into a Middle Eastern black hole that has consumed more wealth than any military adventure in human history. That's not just big money. That's economy destroying, empire ending, civilization altering money. And almost nobody knows about it because the government created an entirely new way to hide the costs from you. Hey, I'm Brandon, and welcome back to My Money Mint, the channel where I dive into topics related to money and wealth. All right, let's get into it. $8 trillion. Let me put that number in perspective. If you spend $1 million every single day, it would take you over 21,000 years to spend $8 trillion. That's more money than most countries produce in an entire decade. But here's what makes this even more outrageous: that 8 trillion is just what we've spent so far. The actual total cost could reach $13.5 trillion over the next 40 years when you factor in interest payments on the money we borrowed to fund these wars. Think about that. We fought wars with money we didn't have, borrowed from future generations who had no say in the decision, and created a debt burden that will crush American prosperity for decades to come. And what did we get for this unprecedented expenditure? Complete and total strategic failure across every single intervention. Let me walk you through the biggest wealth transfer scam in American history. For the first time since the Revolutionary War, America fought major military campaigns without asking the American people to pay for them. Instead of raising taxes like every previous generation did during wartime, the government created something called emergency supplemental funding, a fancy way of saying, we'll just put it on the credit card and worry about it later. Between 2001 and 2010, the Pentagon funded these wars through emergency appropriations that were exempt from normal budget oversight. Even when we had 187,000 troops deployed across 500 military bases, it was still classified as an emergency operation. Emergency funding that was supposed to be temporary became permanent. What historically represented about 2% of the Pentagon's budget suddenly jumped to 20%. The wars became a slush fund where defense contractors could fund their wish lists without any of the normal budget constraints. And here's the most devious part: while we were spending trillions on wars, federal taxes actually decreased. Tax rates fell from 18.8% of GDP in 2001 to 16.2% by 2020. So not only were we not paying for these wars, we were actually paying less in taxes while fighting them. The result? Outstanding federal debt exploded from $3.5 trillion in 2001 to over $20 trillion by 2020. The wars directly added at least $2.2 trillion to that increase, and the interest payments on war debt will continue for the next 40 years. This was financial warfare against the American people, disguised as patriotism. But the money didn't just disappear into thin air, it went somewhere. And where it went tells the real story of why these wars lasted so long and accomplished so little. Between one-third and one-half of all Pentagon spending since 2001 went directly to private military contractors. That's somewhere between $4 and $7 trillion that flowed from taxpayers to corporate shareholders. Contractor payments rose 164% from $140 billion in 2001 to $370 billion by 2019. By the end of the Afghanistan war, there were 1.5 contractors for every soldier, 50% more contractors than actual troops. The top 5 defense contractors alone received up to half of the entire $14 trillion spent by the Pentagon over 2 decades. Companies like Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon became the primary beneficiaries of America's longest wars. And the fraud was staggering. The Commission on Wartime Contracting documented between $31 and $60 billion lost to waste, fraud, and abuse. We're talking about $45 for a case of soda, $100 per load of laundry, and billions spent on ghost projects: schools, teachers, buildings, soldiers, and police that turned out to be phantoms. Defense contractors spent $2.5 billion on lobbying over 2 decades, employing more than 700 lobbyists per year, which is more than one for every member of Congress. Nearly 2 dozen of these lobbyists were former Pentagon or White House officials who moved through the revolving door between government and industry. This wasn't capitalism, it was crony capitalism on a scale that would make Banana Republic dictators jealous. The human cost of this financial black hole is almost impossible to comprehend. Over 30,000 Americans died in these conflicts: 7,052 soldiers, 8,189 contractors, and 14,874 Allied troops. More than 52,000 American service members were wounded, and over 40% of post 9/11 veterans are now entitled to lifetime disability payments. But the real horror is what happened to the people living in the countries we invaded. Direct deaths from violence reached 940,000 people across Afghanistan, Iraq, and other Middle Eastern conflicts. But when you include indirect deaths from disease, displacement, and infrastructure collapse, the total death toll reaches 4.5 to 4.7 million people. That's more deaths than the Holocaust, more deaths than the Rwandan genocide, more deaths than most people can even conceptualize. And 38 million people were displaced from their homes, more than any conflict since World War II. These weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. These were human beings with families, dreams, and lives that were destroyed by wars that accomplished nothing. Let me take you through each conflict and show you exactly what $8 trillion bought us. Afghanistan cost $2.3 trillion over 20 years. The goal was to destroy Al Qaeda, remove the Taliban, and establish a democratic government. The result? In August 2021, the Taliban regained control of the entire country in a matter of weeks. They're now stronger than they were before we invaded. Al Qaeda still exists, and Afghanistan is facing a humanitarian crisis worse than when we arrived. 20 years, $2.3 trillion, thousands of American lives, for absolutely nothing. Iraq cost $1.9 trillion. The stated goals were to eliminate weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist, remove Saddam Hussein, establish democracy, and counter Iranian influence. The result? Iraq became an Iranian proxy state. Iran achieved through our invasion what they couldn't accomplish through 8 years of war with Iraq in the 1980s. We handed our greatest regional enemy control of a country we'd spent trillions trying to influence. Oh, and ISIS emerged from the chaos we created, requiring yet another military intervention to clean up the mess from our previous military intervention. Libya cost $1.1 billion for a 7-month NATO campaign. The goal was to protect civilians and prevent genocide in Benghazi. The result? Libya has been in continuous civil war for over 13 years. It's now a failed state where human slavery has returned. The average Libyan's quality of life is far worse than it was under Gaddafi. We spent over $1 billion to turn a functioning country into a nightmare. Yemen proxy war has cost $54.6 billion supporting Saudi Arabia's bombing campaign. The goal was to restore the internationally recognized government and counter Iranian influence. The result? Yemen now has the world's worst humanitarian crisis. 21.6 million people need aid. The Houthis control more territory than when the war started. And Iran's influence in Yemen has actually increased. Every single intervention failed to achieve its stated objectives. Every single one made the problems worse. Every single one strengthened our enemies while weakening our position. But the contractors got paid. The lobbyists got rich. The revolving door kept spinning. And the bills kept piling up. Now let me show you what this unprecedented spending spree cost America in terms of opportunities lost. What could $8 trillion have built instead? We could have completely modernized America's infrastructure, every road, bridge, airport, and broadband network. We could have built a high-speed rail system connecting every major city. We could have created a world-class renewable energy grid. We could have established universal health care, eliminated student debt, and funded the research that would have kept America technologically competitive with China. We could have invested in education that would have maintained our global competitiveness, or simply returned the money to taxpayers to invest in their own lives and businesses. Instead, we chose to enrich defense contractors while weakening America's economic foundation. But here's the part that should terrify every American. This exact same pattern has destroyed every empire in history. The Roman Empire nearly collapsed in the 3rd century because military overextension and endless wars bankrupted the government. They were forced to debase their currency and impose crushing taxes just to keep their armies in the field. The British Empire accumulated massive debt fighting global wars until interest payments consumed over half their government budget. They lost their reserve currency status and were forced to ask the IMF for a bailout in 1976. The Soviet Union collapsed because military spending consumed so much of their economy that they couldn't maintain basic infrastructure or provide for their people. Every single empire that has fallen in history followed the same pattern: military overextension, financed through debt until the economic foundation crumbled. And America is following that exact same playbook. Our debt to GDP ratio now exceeds most developed countries. Only Japan and Italy have higher ratios, and both have struggled with economic stagnation for decades. We're spending more on our military than the next 10 countries combined, while our infrastructure crumbles, our educational system falls behind competitors, and our healthcare system consumes more resources while producing worse outcomes. The pattern is unmistakable. The warning signs are everywhere. And yet, we continue down the same path that has destroyed every empire before us. But wait, it gets worse. Because the ghost budget system that funded these wars has become the new normal for American military spending. Right now, 99% of assistance to Ukraine is being funded through the same emergency supplemental process that funded the Middle East wars. Congress has already approved over $175 billion with no end date, no cost estimate, and no clear definition of success. At the end of the Biden administration, they requested another $106 billion in emergency funding that includes money for Israel, Taiwan, and border security, none of which are actual emergencies requiring immediate action. The ghost budget system has become institutionalized. Constitutional constraints on war spending have been permanently bypassed, and corporate profits continue to drive military policy regardless of strategic outcomes or fiscal consequences. We're not learning from our mistakes. We're doubling down on them, and the costs keep mounting. Veterans care from the Middle East wars will require at least $2.2 trillion over the next 30 years. Interest payments on war debt could reach $6.5 trillion over 40 years. These obligations are locked in. They can't be canceled or reduced. Future generations will spend their entire working lives paying for wars that accomplished nothing for America, but enriched a small group of defense contractors and helped Israel's positioning in the Middle East. Meanwhile, China is investing in infrastructure, technology, and education while we continue to pour money into a military-industrial complex that has failed at every strategic objective it's attempted. This isn't sustainable. It's not even rational. It's the behavior of an empire in terminal decline, unable to break free from the interests that are consuming it from within. The military-industrial congressional complex that President Eisenhower warned about has become a monster that feeds on American wealth while producing nothing but strategic failure and human suffering. Defense contractors profit from permanent warfare regardless of whether we win or lose. Politicians benefit from defense jobs in their districts. Pentagon officials rotate through lucrative private sector positions, and the costs are hidden from the public through debt financing that pushes the burden onto future generations. It's a self-perpetuating system that has captured the American government and redirected the nation's resources toward private profit rather than public benefit. The evidence is overwhelming. Every intervention has failed. Every dollar spent has strengthened our enemies while weakening our position. Every contract has enriched contractors while impoverishing taxpayers. And yet, the system continues because it serves the interests of those who profit from it, regardless of the cost to everyone else. This is what imperial decline looks like from the inside. Not a sudden collapse, but a gradual hemorrhaging of wealth and capability until the foundation becomes too weak to support the superstructure. We're watching it happen in real time. The Middle East wars have already demonstrated the price of imperial hubris. The question is whether America will learn from this expensive lesson or continue repeating the mistakes of past empires until decline becomes irreversible. The choice is still ours to make. We can continue down this path of military overextension and debt accumulation until we follow the Roman, British, and Soviet empires into history. Or we can recognize that true national strength comes from productive investment in our people, our infrastructure, and our future, rather than endless wars that enrich contractors while weakening the nation. But based on how little attention this $8 trillion catastrophe has received in our political discourse, and how eagerly we're repeating the same patterns with new conflicts, I'm not optimistic that we'll choose wisely. The financial black hole of the Middle East has already consumed more wealth than any military adventure in human history. And unless we fundamentally change how we approach national security and military spending, it will continue consuming American prosperity until there's nothing left to consume. The bill for 23 years of strategic failure is coming due. And every American, whether they supported these wars or not, will spend the rest of their lives paying for the most expensive mistake in our nation's history. Thank you for watching my Money Mint. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover in a future video, please let me know in the comments.